So some things only look perfect. Holland premieres March 27th only on Prime Video. This week, on Wednesday, March 26th at 6:30 p.m., we're hosting an early screening of Nicole Kidman's new movie Holland at the Telshire 12 Theater in our city of Las Cruces, New Mexico. Attendance and popcorn are free, so if you're in town, please come by and meet us and enjoy the movie. In this wildly unpredictable thriller, Nicole Kidman is the meticulous Nancy Vandergroot, a teacher and a homemaker whose picture-perfect life with her community pillar husband, played by Matthew McFadden, and son, played by Jude Hill, in tulip-filled Holland, Michigan, tumbles into a twisted tale. Nancy and her friendly colleague, Gail Garcia Bernal, become suspicious of a secret, only to discover that nothing in their lives is what it seems. So I'll put a link to the audio and video trailers in our show notes, and I hope we'll see some of you there.
True Crime Brewery contains disturbing content related to real-life crimes. Medical information is opinion based on facts of a crime and should not be interpreted as medical advice or treatment. Listener discretion is advised.
Welcome to True Crime Brewery. I'm Jill.
And I'm Dick.
So when Ernest Brendel, his wife Alice, and their 8-year-old daughter Emily disappeared from their Barrington, Rhode Island home, the FBI and the state police suspected that they were victims of foul play. So the family of 3 had just moved to Barrington from Providence about 3 years earlier, and they believed they had found a safe and happy place for little Emily to grow up. Join us at the quiet end for Trading in Murder, when Ernest Brendel filed a complaint against commodity trader Chris Hightower. Hightower's life was in a tailspin. The deadline for responding to the complaint came and went. Hightower's wife asked for a divorce, and then he was served with a court order barring him from contact with his children. So exposed as a con man and a thief, Hightower began stalking the Brendels and even plotted to kidnap young Emily. Scary story, crazy guy. Let's have a beer.
Okay, we're going to have Flying Jenny Extra Pale Ale from Gray Sail Brewing in Westerly, Rhode Island. This is an American Pale Ale, 5.3% alcohol by volume. The beer is a kind of a dark amber color with a modestly sized off-white head, tiny bit of lacing, a nice aroma, citrus and flowers, some sweet malt. It tasted better than you could get from the nose. Grapefruit, flowers, very strong malt background, caramel. Hoppy beer, but still pretty malty.
Yeah, I don't mind a little malt.
Yeah, I know. You just don't like that dank pine stuff. But
Pine is not my favorite, but I am willing to make that sacrifice.
Okay.
Because the alcohol's worth it, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, open it up. All right, Dickie. I know your voice is better this week, so do you want to start us out?
Sure.
You up for it? Okay.
Yeah, I can talk today.
Awesome.
Both Ernest Brendel and Alice Bobb were Ivy League school graduates and had advanced degrees. They had a bright future ahead of them. He was a Wall Street lawyer, and she was a New York City librarian. Alice was petite. Ernie was kind of also, wasn't he? He was a little bit taller and a little bit stockier.
A lot stockier than her, but not that much taller, yeah.
Yeah, little people.
Okay.
And they could have lived in an exclusive East Side apartment building with a doorman and owned an expensive car parked in a private garage. But not for Ernie and Alice. New York was just a step on their path to the life of their dreams. Both had graduated from Brown. Ernest, or Ernie as his friends called him, had gone on to earn a law degree from the University of Virginia, and he passed the New York bar. Alice earned a master's degree in library science from Columbia University.
Yeah, so this couple just puts me to shame. I just can't believe. Not just being smart, but so sensible and organized. Just impressive.
It surely is.
It really is. So Ernie's small apartment was not their idea of where they wanted to live their lives, though. They rented a slightly larger apartment, but still really wanted a home and eventually children. So a few years after they were married, they moved out of the city and they settled into a house in North Tarrytown, just a short walk from the train station, and that's where they commuted into the city. Alice worked at the library, and Ernie practiced law in partnership with another attorney. So Ernie had been born in Jersey City, New Jersey, to German parents Jacob and Jolene. As a boy, Ernie was set on becoming a pitcher for the Boston Red Sox. And I'd say a lot of kids had that idea.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
You want to be a pro athlete.
Absolutely. So the family eventually settled in an upper-class section of Convent Station, New Jersey, in a 2-story colonial house. His dad, an import-export entrepreneur, was away from home half of each year, leaving the raising of the 3 kids to Jolene. In high school, Ernie showed his creativity by writing for the school newspaper. He did excel at baseball, but his small size kind of kept him from professional sports. At least that's the way he thought about it.
Yeah, well, we've talked about how difficult it is to get into the professional league.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah, I wanted to be a pitcher for the Red Sox, but I couldn't throw the ball.
Well, that could be a problem too, I guess. Yeah. So after he realized he's really not going to be a professional baseball player, his education became a very serious focus. He entered pre-law at Brown, and after he did begin his career as a lawyer, he married a woman named Joanne. But they divorced 7 years later, and they didn't have any children together. So he would go on to marry Alice, of course. Alice Bobb was the youngest of 3 children. Her parents were Arthur and Arlene Bobb. The family was very intellectual, and Alice picked up her parents' and siblings' love of learning. Her dad was an eye surgeon, and that's a profession that was carried on by her eldest brother. Her other brother became an attorney. So, surrounded by books and ideas from a young age, Alice gave serious consideration to becoming a doctor herself. She dated often and had a wide circle of friends. The grades and extracurriculars earned her acceptance at 3 colleges: the Connecticut College for Women, Wellesley, and Pembroke College, and that was the women's division of Brown University in Providence, Rhode Island. So she had a real sense of adventure and took advantage of opportunities to travel abroad. She also loved to read, and after college, her apartment in New York was filled with books. Then after going to Columbia, she joined New York's public library system, working in mid-Manhattan and at a smaller branch. She did continue to have a pretty active social life, though, and one of her boyfriends was Ernie Brendel, and he was very taken with this pretty and witty librarian.
Yes, he was. So in 1980, Ernie and Alice moved from Tarrytown to Providence. Their lives changed in June of 1983 when their baby girl Emily was born. When she was born, Alice was 37 and Ernie was 45. So maybe this was going to be a one and done?
I don't know. I mean, it was getting kind of late. Yes, she was in her 40s by the time this all happened. So, yeah, they were probably just happy with the one child.
Well, and despite all their successes, Emily was the best thing that ever happened to them. Having carefully planned the birth, both parents doted on their only child. Ernie, who investigated everything before making a decision, searched for a new home. And he found it just a few exits down the interstate, Barrington.
Right, so Barrington is a place where money can buy you peace, quiet, and a feeling of safety. Most homes are charming and large, and they're on spacious wooded lots. The landmark of the town is a white steeple of the Barrington Congregational Church, a classic New England place of worship. And this church would play an important role in a crime that would stun the community. So Chris Hightower was the oldest child of Margaret and James Robert Hightower. He was called Jameer at home and Jerry by his classmates, and that was based on his middle name. He had few friends and was unhappy at home as he reached his teens. His home life, which was never ideal, got worse when he learned that the man he thought was his father actually was not. His mother had never married his biological father, and she had given birth to Chris at age 17. His father had abandoned his pregnant girlfriend, and then, of course, abandoned Chris. So Chris was really filled with shame over this. This new knowledge drove a real wedge between him and the rest of the family. Efforts by his strict stepfather to discipline him included beatings with a dog leash. So when I say not ideal, I mean it.
Apparently.
So the punishment really stoked anger in Chris, but he did try to be a well-behaved child and keep out of trouble. Still, for the rest of his life, Chris would rebel against any rules that tried to kind of, hem in his behaviors. His home life did make him determined that he would be a success, but I think it was kind of like an I'll show them more than a good thing.
I think that's true.
So in high school, Chris Hightower ran track and played basketball, but being an athlete didn't make him popular. When he graduated from Titusville High, he had plans for college, but really not the greats. In the fall, he joined the pre-med program at Indian River Junior College. Andy moved into a dorm, got a part-time job to help pay expenses, and began taking classes. His course of study allowed him to speak proudly about becoming a physician. But Hightower discovered that he had the ability to charm people and really make them believe whatever he wanted. So that's kind of the beginning of becoming a con man.
Yeah, he found his niche.
He kind of did. Loved to argue, persuade, and even fool people. So he played basketball, but he didn't make the team. And when the final exams came up, he dropped out. He only had transfer credits for 2 of the courses, and that was zoology and freshman math elective. Then he took a job working in construction. But boy, did he hate that. Chris wanted to get as far away from his stepfather as possible, and he wound up living with a roommate in Arlington, Virginia, both of them working construction. He did have some money, and for the first time he did have a pretty busy social life. As an eligible single man, Chris could see Vietnam in his future, though. But he didn't want to return to college, and he was afraid he would be drafted. So what he did was he enlisted in the Navy and indicated that he wanted to be a doctor. For 16 weeks, he endured boot camp in Great Lakes Naval Training Center in Illinois. The Navy assigned him to another 16 weeks of training at Hospital Corpsman School. And after that, Chris received his Navy assignment. It was not Vietnam. He was sent to Bethesda Medical Center in Maryland.
Yeah, and at that hospital, he worked all over the place. And this was where some of the most serious Navy and Marine casualties of Vietnam were brought in for treatment. Hightower saw the full spectrum of their war wounds, and later he became an operating room technician and was assigned to assist surgeons at the Newport Naval Hospital in Rhode Island. Now, while he was stationed in Bethesda, he dated an Asian girl. He bought her a diamond ring, and they did marry. But the relationship ended tragically when his young wife was believed to have died while on a solo trip to visit her family in Malaysia. For a reason never explained, her diamond ring was left behind in Maryland with Hightower. That is interesting.
It's interesting, and I've heard from different sources that this was just there was no foul play, had nothing to do with him. And from others, I've heard that authorities really investigated this disappearance. But regardless, no charges were ever filed.
It's just sort of weird, strange to me that
it was weird, yes.
She's traveling alone and leaves her ring behind.
Yes. Oh, I'm with you. Totally, it's weird. Yes, it is kind of strange, especially knowing what we do about him later on. And while he told his family that he had married this girl, he'd never changed his marital status in his Navy records, so that made you wonder. Now, when Chris was assigned to work in Newport, Rhode Island, Ellen Crown, an attractive young woman from New York's Long Island, earned her nursing degree from a Catholic school in Rhode Island, and she immediately enlisted in the Navy. She was given an officer's commission and assigned as an obstetrics nurse at the Naval Hospital Complex at Newport. So the excitement of her work among the new babies and her role of being a naval officer really seemed to suit her. Then she noticed this quiet, well-mannered corpsman who worked in the operating room. Now, at first she didn't like him, but his smooth talk and determination would eventually change her mind. And remember, that was his strength, to talk people into things, basically. So Ellen was fascinated by Chris Hightower's apparent intelligence and his desire to improve himself. He convinced Ellen that he planned to become a physician, and because of his own unhappy childhood, he wanted to be an exceptional father. Ellen, who was the product of a loving and supportive family, was in love. Chris was about 6 feet tall, trim and athletic, and not bad looking. They began to plan a future together after their military careers. Things would be good, he promised her. All he needed was to get out of the service and start a professional life to support a family for them. So when the time of his enlistment was completed, Ellen and Chris decided to stay in the Navy for another 3 months to get one more promotion and a pay increase. When he was discharged, he had spent over 4 years in the Navy. He no longer had to worry about Ellen being a superior officer. She stayed in the Navy, but he was a civilian again. So it was not long before they were sharing an apartment off base. With his GI Bill, Ellen working to support him, his 7 transfer credits from Indian River Junior College, and then 17 educational credits from Navy schools, Hightower was ready to go back to college and work toward becoming a doctor. So he enrolled as a 23-year-old freshman at the University of Rhode Island, and he chose to major in zoology. His cumulative grade point average after 3 quarters was 3.14. So things were going okay.
Yeah, that's a nice start.
Yeah, but he had to study, he had to hold down part-time jobs to bring in money, and he had to keep Ellen happy. Wasn't easy for him.
Well, it's okay. It's not supposed to be easy.
Sure.
So Ellen married Chris Hightower in the base chapel at Newport. She wore the same diamond ring her husband had once given to his Malaysian bride, the one who had vanished years earlier. So he's kind of recycling the ring?
Yeah. That's another really weird thing.
It is. For Ellen, the diamond showed everyone that she was not only a naval officer, but also the wife of a medical student. The couple moved into a new apartment, and Hightower returned to school. Now that he was in school and married to a girl from a wealthy family, these, by the way, are 2 things that were the biggest goals in his life, he felt tied down by the academic rules and by Ellen's demands. There was little spare time, and Ellen noticed that her husband was irritable and complained more and more about the way she did things. So despite his outward confidence, he is very aware of his shortcomings, and his grades began to slide. And then trying to live on her salary alone, they gave up their apartment and moved into Navy housing. In the spring semester, Hightower's grades fell 2 C's and 2 D's. Not too good. So that'd be about a 2.5 GPA.
Well, yeah, they really fell off, let's be honest. And that's not going to get him into med school, so his dream of becoming a doctor was really fading away. And, maybe he really wasn't able to reach those kind of academic standards. Not everyone is, and that's okay. But he wasn't going to accept that. And I also think there was a lack of effort. He wanted things to be easy. But they stuck it out. Hightower stayed in school while Ellen continued her nursing job for the Navy. But his grades did not improve. C's, D's, and incompletes. At least they were still together, though. And on December 27th, 2 days after Christmas, he was able to graduate with a Bachelor of Science degree in zoology. Now, I don't know what med schools think of zoology. I know you can do a lot of different undergraduate degrees, but if your grades aren't good and your major's zoology, I don't think your odds of getting into med school are excellent.
No, they're pretty poor.
Yeah.
I mean, just not the major. I mean, you can major in anything, but the grade point average, that's a very crucial part.
Yeah, and I don't know if he ever took the MCATs. I wasn't able to find out about how he did on that if he did. But getting out of school at that point should have been a time to relax and have a little fun. And that was not the case. By this time, Ellen was pregnant and she was ready to resign from her job, which meant an end to her Navy paycheck. So it really was time for the man she had put through college to support his family. It was time for Chris to get a job.
The harsh reality of things.
Yeah. So Chris began working as a drug salesman for Riker Laboratories. Ellen was making the transition from Navy officer to homemaker, and then their first daughter, Deborah, was born. Being a field rep seemed perfect for Hightower at first. He had always looked up to doctors, and in recent years he told everyone that he would become a physician himself. So now, selling prescription drugs, he was in hospitals, drugstores, and doctors' offices. And Riker Labs even gave him a company car. It was a pretty good job. But unfortunately, he really hated the job. And you know why is because it was like torture for him to scrape and bow before doctors. He did not like doctors being above him as far as that goes. And when you're trying to make sales, of course, the person you're trying to sell to is the boss, really. especially in a profession like that. So for 2 years, he made his rounds, but his efforts just decreased. At home, education was also a topic because Ellen was entering a program where she would earn a master's degree. So by 1978, he was tired of Riker Labs. Ellen was pregnant again, and she was critical when he quit the sales job, giving up their medical benefits with another baby on the way now. So Chris began working at a restaurant, and that's where he would meet his next wife. Ellen gave birth to another daughter, Donna, and Chris had a new idea. He began to send out applications for medical schools as far away as Poland. He didn't care where, as long as he could get into medical school. If only he could get accepted somewhere, then he could prove he could do the work. And that's even if Ellen was skeptical about his grades being good enough for any medical school. So he did get accepted, and that was at American University of the Caribbean. But he couldn't afford it, and his father-in-law refused to loan him money for the tuition, because the plan was to leave the wife and kids behind and go there. And that was not cool. So the couple became more and more distant, and that's when Chris developed an interest in an attractive 18-year-old, Susan Slicker, at work. So she came from a family with great wealth, and after 7 years of marriage, Ellen was very aware of her husband's short temper and his refusal to take his responsibilities seriously. So for her, Susan was just one issue in the crumbling marriage. Wasn't the biggest issue, really.
No, but it was an issue.
Of course, yes. She was quite young, right out of high school.
So Ellen began to fear for the safety of herself and the girls one day when Hightower became violent. So this quiet man exploded just out of nowhere. The family had 2 female dogs. So a neighbor's male dog, which had impregnated one of his females the previous year, came sniffing around again. So Hightower erupted in a rage, grabbed a shovel, and attacked the dog. And he beat it to death with a shovel, basically. Then he stuffed the corpse in a box and threw it away. So that's pretty gruesome. Ellen wondered if what had happened to the dog could happen to her also.
Okay, well, someone does that to an animal, they could do it to anyone, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And that would be, for sure, the day I would be gone.
Yep.
So I think Ellen was pretty much on board with what I'm saying, and she and Chris divorced, but he soon remarried Susan Slicker of Barrington. Hightower made plans to return to school then. Susan's father, Clyde Slicker, proudly gave the hand of his then 20-year-old daughter to the 32-year-old Hightower. Barrington was offering total acceptance to Hightower, too, because he'd been born and raised poor, and they gave him a lot of credit for moving up. So by becoming part of the Slicker family, he would be part of the community of Barrington. But there was one sign that things were not really as they seemed. After his divorce from Ellen, Hightower had stolen her wedding ring and had the diamond reset.
That's a lot of use out of that ring.
Yes, this was the 3rd wife to wear the same diamond. Now, less than a year after Susan and Chris settled into their new home, they became parents of a son, and they named him John. When Chris was home, he liked to sit in front of the TV and do nothing. When he wasn't studying or running out the door to work in a lab, his behavior was very difficult. It seemed like nothing that Susan did was right. He found fault with the way the house was cleaned, the way the baby looked, and the way she dressed. So polite to outsiders, at home he would shout at her, accuse her of infidelity, and all kinds of things. His superiors at school were wondering about the same thing. He was having trouble keeping up academically. He showed lapses of judgment, like bringing his baby son into the lab and putting the infant's carrier on a table while experiments were being conducted right there.
Oh, jeez.
So they began to doubt that Hightower could meet the requirements to continue in the program. Then he published his master's thesis, which was a 48-page document entitled Body Water and Its Distribution in Neonatal Rats. So his name was stamped in gold on the glossy black cover. The data and the declaration of how his study could be the first to show that corticosterone may have biological activity in fluid volume regulation in 12-day-old neonatal rats was really nothing special to the faculty, but still he did get his master's degree. But now he faced the hard part, oral and written exams to continue in the PhD program. If he wanted to become Dr. Hightower, he had to pass those exams in the fall, and even he knew he wasn't up to the challenge.
No.
Then one day, Susan, pregnant with her 2nd child, took Johnny to daycare as usual and went on to school herself, leaving Chris at home alone. While she was in class, she was called to the telephone, and a neighbor told her, "Your house is on fire." Yeah, so Susan raced across the campus to find her husband, but he wasn't in his office. So she quickly drove away to pick up little Johnny. When she called from the daycare center, Chris had reached his office, and they went back to the house together. When they got there, they found clouds of smoke rising into the sky. Fire department investigators said the flames had started in the basement as a result of spontaneous combustion between a bag of fertilizer and an open can of motor oil. When Susan and Chris finally entered their house, they had to walk through several inches of standing water. The combined damage from the fire, the smoke, and the water had left the place a total shambles. But despite a few structural problems, the insurance adjuster said that it all could be repaired. So they still had their home, and they received a check, which was the important thing, I think, to Chris Hightower. Hightower then convinced the biomed faculty at the college to postpone his oral exam, and he was given more time to prepare. Also, money had been extremely scarce around the Hightower household, but this new insurance money really turned things around. And then, just 2 weeks later, a fire happened again, this time causing even more damage. So arson investigators sifted through the ashes, and they decided that the flames had been deliberately set at 4 different places in the cellar. Gasoline cans with the fingerprints of Chris Hightower were found nearby. Boxes stacked in the front hallway were stolen as well. So Susan and Chris were taken to the police station for questioning this time, and suspicious investigators wanted Chris to take a lie detector test. He refused, though. He said he'd been asleep in the apartment when the fire started, because after the first fire they'd gone to stay in an apartment while it was being repaired. He said his wife would vouch for him, and that was enough to prove that he had done nothing wrong.
You got to be suspicious.
Oh, they very much were.
2 fires in 2 weeks?
I know. Arson investigators considered him a suspect, and they would still question the origin of the fire years later. But unfortunately, they couldn't file any charges. And Allstate wrote out a bigger check this time. Then his professors began to wonder about Chris's bad luck. He reported losing all of his notes, books, and research material in the second fire. And without those, he said, how can I possibly prepare for the exam in the fall? He couldn't.
Oh.
No.
I guess we're going to have to forget about it or postpone them again.
Yeah. Like the police, arson investigators, and insurance adjusters, the professors really began to have serious concerns. But it really didn't matter in the end. Hightower decided he was through with the university anyway. He quit their classrooms and laboratories and put his mind and his charm to work just making money.
Susan gave birth to their second son. They named him Robert. But the marriage wasn't turning out like she'd expect. Chris spent $1,500 to go to Chicago, and he attended a get-rich-quick course in the business of commodity and futures trading. He returned home very excited, told Susan that their worries were over. School was going nowhere. He had a master's degree, didn't want to waste any more time. So he's going into business for himself. He picked the risky business of trading in commodities and futures. And you can get rich quick, but you can also lose a whole lot of money. He would prove this repeatedly with a very shaky financial career. For Hightower, the attraction was simple. As a successful broker, he could achieve status in life and never worry about money again. Instead of being a doctor, he could invest their money. The heart of such trading is the New York Mercantile Exchange, the Chicago Board of Trade, and the Chicago Mercantile Exchange. But the practice is spread all over the world. They all set a price today for something they will buy or sell at a future date.
Yeah, but super risky. So Hightower put the fires, his marriage concerns, and his studies behind him and set out to make some serious money. He and Susan and their 2 boys moved back into the twice-burned house, and he set up an office there for his business. He put a satellite dish on the roof and opened the computer program he had bought during his 2-day training course in Chicago. Susan, now the mother of 2, finished her master's degree in psychology. Hightower might have been a failure at Riker Labs, but he thought of himself as pretty successful at selling himself to people. He spoke about the stock market and financial terms, and rather than look stupid by asking him to slow down or clarify, people just assumed he knew what he was talking about. Only later would they find out that he did not have a clue. Experienced investors shied away from him, but he kept moving forward. For 6 months, he printed reports of inventory and values that contained good news. Everything seemed to be working out. He stayed busy in his home office, printing charts and graphs, reading books and magazines, and really just steeping himself in the whole commodities game. With his phone calls, there were thousands of dollars purchased and sold in an efficient manner. But there came a day when an investment guild member wanted more than just that paperwork. He wanted some of his money. Hightower told him that all liquid funds were invested. So members made a telephone call to Hightower, who broke the bad news they had all half expected. Most of their money was gone, and people were furious. So not only had they lost their money, but they'd been led on by lying reports. A group of these people confronted Hightower, who welcomed them into his modest home and politely listened to his former friends and clients scream and threaten him. Now, when all was said and done, 9 months after the club's original investment of $102,000, it had a net worth of only $231. So Hightower had skimmed much of it just for his own living expenses, and he had lost the rest.
Well, it underscores your comment about how risky this trading is.
Yeah, plus he didn't really know what he was doing.
Yeah.
Now, these were people he met at church or through his wife, so it was kind of embarrassing for her.
Yeah, it just compounds this.
Yeah. So in reviewing their documents, members found that Hightower had never invested any of his own money, although he had listed himself as being in for $12,000. The money that was in his name had actually come from his mother's retirement fund, and when the other members paid in their shares, he withdrew the $12,000 and sent it back to her. So that was a complete setup.
Yeah.
So he was playing the market entirely with other people's money, but really he didn't seem to have much of a conscience, and it was no big deal to him. Susan was ready to move back to Barrington, but before moving, he filled out the necessary forms and got a license to be a broker from the National Futures Association and the Commodity Futures Training Commission. So it really didn't bother him that much that he'd ripped off these people.
No, they're a means to the end.
Exactly. So Chris returned to Barrington a happy man with his young wife and his 2 little boys. He didn't have a job, but that wasn't important. They would live with Susan's parents and sister for a while, and he planned to set up his own business pretty soon. Before the end of the year, Chris created Hightower Investments and rented an office in nearby Warwick. There were no clients, but Clyde Slicker helped pay the bills. When another year went by without Hightower earning enough money to support himself and his family, Susan decided to call a family meeting, and everyone agreed that the time for a steady job and paycheck had come. Hightower then went back to his investment work, claiming he was close to earning big money. But it was Susan who had to go out and find a job. She took over her mother's old position as secretary at the Barrington Congressional Church, and Hightower holed up in his office, read the Wall Street Journal, and pretty much just played around with his computers. I mean, he was part of the church, so people had respected him there, but as far as his business, things were not going in the right direction, or in any direction.
No.
Ernie Brendel started doing business from his home so he could be there for his daughter. Using his skills as a patent and trademark lawyer, he was in demand to work with a number of companies. So word circulated that the lawyer could be a hard man with whom to work, but that he paid the bills on time, and he always accomplished his goals. Ernie eventually had a stable of companies whose products ranged from arcade games to cosmetics, and he used much of his time studying his own investments. He was always eager to check out something new. The money was good, but then he began to have second thoughts about working alone. So he sent out resumes to law firms around New England. And shortly after starting his business in Barrington, he ran into another entrepreneur. So Ernie's friend Paul Ryan, who was also an attorney, introduced Ernie Brendel to Chris Hightower. Not a good thing for Ernie.
The 2 men, although they were miles apart ethically, had a lot in common. Since Ernie had few friends in the area, they began to socialize. Both loved athletics and ran their own businesses, doted on their families, and just loved to talk about money. Ernie welcomed the handyman help that Chris could offer around his house. The friendship grew over time, and even took their families on a joint vacation to a home that Hightower's in-laws owned on a lake in New Hampshire. But from the first day, Ernie was more than a potential friend to Chris Hightower. He was a potential customer. So Ernie did make a small investment with Hightower, advancing a few $1,000s for Hightower to buy equipment. The investment was a bust, but Ernie didn't think much of it. When the persistent Hightower approached him again for an investment, Ernie demanded to see the trading results first. The printouts Hightower gave him were absolutely amazing, too good to be true, which they were. Hightower had turned a profit of more than 80% in only a few months of trading commodities. Ernie ended up investing more than $11,000 of his own money in May 1991, and he brought some friends along with him. So it ended up being a total investment of $40,000. This time, when the money fell off, Ernie checked with the people whose accounts Hightower had cited in order to lure Ernie back into investing.
Yeah, so these former clients said the figures were all lies. Hightower had lost most of their money. So Ernie was very angry. He had not only been swindled out of his hard-earned money, but he felt like he'd been betrayed by a friend. And he had caused other friends to have financial losses too.
Yeah.
So he demanded that Hightower return all the money, and he even took his complaints to the federal agency overseeing commodity traders. Ernie got enough from Hightower to pay back his fellow investors, but he was determined to put a stop to Hightower's scams. He was out over $11,000, and while he might not get any of that money back, he was determined that Hightower would never con anyone else. As much as he wanted to present an image of success to the world, Hightower was still facing disaster. So now Susan had filed for divorce. He asked that she make a list of things that were wrong so that he would know what he needed to do to correct and save the marriage. She had said she would think about it. Now, losing Susan would be more to Chris than just parting with his wife of 9 years. It would mean he'd have to leave his children and the big family house. It would mean a loss of all the Slicker's family cars, too. So he'd have no family, no mobility, and no roof over his head.
Yeah, probably the last thing in the world he wanted was to be separated from his wife.
Yes.
Because she's got the big bucks.
Right, and his father-in-law was very good to him.
Yeah.
Adding to his problems, his landlords for his office were getting restless because he was months behind in his rent. And it was impossible to evade them because the only entrance to his office was by the stairs at the side of the building, where they would see him every time he came or went. So when the latest rent check bounced, the landlords had gone to the Barrington police. Hightower got a phone call from Sergeant John Lazaro, who said the check had to be made good within 7 days, or else. Now the landlords weren't his only creditors either. Banks, credit card companies, and collection agencies were all demanding money that he just did not have. A guy from Financial Securities Information Systems in Florida had come up to his office and repossessed the computer equipment that had linked him with the financial world. The loss of this machinery was a serious setback. Knowledge was critical in providing clients a trading advantage, and without it, Hightower could not compete. The hours he spent combing through those electronic reports were really the happiest part of his workday. Now he didn't have any clients. Then there was the complaint from the U.S. Commodities and Futures Trading Commission, and when the day came, there was a deadline for him to respond to the allegations made against him, and he didn't. Everything seemed to be falling apart at the same time. His old friend, Ernie Brendel, had turned on him, that's what he thought. And Ernie had called the feds, claiming that Hightower had signed him as a client by using made-up numbers, which was true. So Ernie had been after him for months trying to get his money back, and Hightower was just frustrated and angry. He felt like nobody would give him a break. Now Ernie knew that futures and commodities were risky, so Hightower thought that was his own fault.
Hightower saw the CFTC complaint by Ernie as the biggest problem he was facing. Rent could be juggled, computer gear could be replaced, maybe even win back Susan. But if federal investigators sided with Ernie, they would revoke his license as a commodities trader. That would be the end of his career. He'd lose his trading ticket, and that would force him out of the business that he loved. He needed a plan. Actually, there's one already beginning to form in the back of his mind.
A really crazy one.
Really crazy.
So when Susan refused to reconcile with him, Hightower responded with rage. He had never harmed her once in their 9 years of marriage, but she was afraid of him. He told her that a human life is worth $5,000, and that's what he had paid to have someone kill her. if she tried to take the children away during a divorce. He said he had paid another $1,000 to make sure it looked like an accident. So the situation had gone from a marital conflict into a threat of execution. And there was more. He said his ex-wife and daughters also would be on his assassination list. Clyde and Mary Lou Slicker and Sue's sister Kathy would also be turned over to the paid killer if they tried to take his boys. So in earlier arguments, Susan had held her own. But this was different. Now she was really afraid. He had this really icy tone, which was terrifying.
I'll bet. So on September 18th, 1992, Alice Brendel was up for her morning jog before the sun came up. It's a cool, pleasant day. Alice made her way easily around the neighborhood. One of the beautiful things about living in such a peaceful suburb was the safety she felt. When she'd finished her run, she stood on the wide front porch for a few minutes to cool down and read the headlines of the Providence Journal Bulletin. That had been delivered at 4 a.m. People get up early.
Well, newspaper people do, for sure.
Her morning jog, the newspaper delivery, the fact that she would go back inside, shower before waking Ernie and Emily, these are all the hallmarks of a family with a routine. It was the same every weekday morning. Later, she and Ernie drank coffee. They talked about the day's plans. She would be at work, he would work from home, and Emily would go to school, and then to the YMCA, usual day-to-day stuff.
Yeah, Alice would take the number 100 RIPTA express bus downtown to avoid driving in heavy traffic. So she picked up her purse, kissed Ernie on the cheek, and set off down County Road for the small sheltered bus stop. At 7:56 a.m., the bus stopped and Alice settled into a seat. Getting off at the Kennedy Plaza terminal at 8:13, she walked the few blocks uphill to the Brown University Library. Emily Brendel had turned 8 years old on June 27th. She still loved going to her red brick school, and she rarely missed a day. Her conversation with her friends that morning would focus on the class trip planned for Friday, when everyone would go down to Newport to see the Viking ships. With her closest friends, Emily would share these scary dreams she'd been having and the stories that she had written about them. She called one the dream that would never go away, and although she knew it was just a stupid dream, it still upset her. So Ernie walked back into their big white house, got himself another cup of coffee, and climbed the steps to his office on the second floor. He took a short break to hook up a new combination fax and telephone answering machine. Ernie was hoping for one specific phone call. He was expecting Joe Mazza of the National Futures Association to give him an update on whether Chris Hightower had met the NFA deadline to respond to his complaints.
Before Chris Hightower got started that morning, while the coffee was still brewing, telephone rang. Joe Mazza from the NFA asked him about missing the complaint deadline. Chris said that personal problems had come up, mainly trouble with his wife, and that he had just forgotten about the NFA deadline. He had no car that morning. Sue had the Jeep over at the White Church, and his mother and father-in-law had the other two. So he had to come up with some cash, and quickly. Now, Ernie, of course, would have a stash of money somewhere around his house, and maybe he could con Ernie into another loan. He was going to have to go there anyway. He was trying to convince Ernie to drop his complaint that he had made against him.
Well, at 5 o'clock, Ernie Brendel backed his Toyota out of the garage, driving down the long driveway and onto Middle Highway. 10 minutes later, he was at the YMCA to get Emily signing the pickup sheet. Alice had covered her computer terminal at the library and reversed her morning route. She got on the bus across the street from the courthouse at exactly the same time Ernie was picking up Emily. When the bus pulled to the side of the road 20 minutes later, Alice stepped off alone. Ernie had parked the Toyota in a nearby parking lot, chatting with his daughter as they waited for the bus. When it did, Emily jumped out of the car, running to give her mother a hug. And this was the family routine.
Yeah.
During the Hightowers' evening meal, Chris reminded Susan that someone would have to come home on Thursday night to watch the kids because he had some private business and might not return home until Friday morning. So Susan Hightower left home at 8:30 a.m., just as if she was heading for work at the White Church, but instead she headed for Providence for her 9 a.m. appointment with her lawyer. Hightower left the house a short time later, driving their Chevy station wagon. As he passed the church, he noticed that the Jeep was not there. He drove to the Sears store, and using one of his credit cards, he bought a new pair of black high-top Reebok sneakers. Wearing his new shoes, he drove to Thompson's Sport Shop. Inside, Hightower told the salesman that he was interested in getting a large crossbow. He was shown a fully assembled Bear Devastator crossbow, which was huge, 3 feet long, and painted camouflage. Hightower said he wasn't ready to buy it then, but he might be back later, so he thanked the salesman and he left. After Susan finished up her appointment with her divorce attorney, the judge had allowed the filing of a complaint for divorce, ordered a constable to serve a domestic abuse complaint against the husband, and approved a motion for temporary allowances that gave Susan exclusive custody of the children. The judge had also approved a restraining order to remove Chris Hightower from the house. Hightower returned to the white church to check on Susan, and then he saw that her Jeep was still not there. He drove through Barrington's small shopping district looking in restaurant windows, but no Susan. Passing the church again just before noon, he saw the Jeep pull into the parking lot, and he drove in next to her. He got out of the car and started yelling at her, harassing her to let him into her office. But then Susan's sister showed up, and he finally backed off and drove away in a rage. That evening, Hightower received another call from Joe Mazza of the National Futures Association, and he told Hightower that he wanted to come up to Barrington on Friday, along with his supervisor, and audit the books at Hightower Investments. The allegations brought by Mr. Brendel were serious, Mazza said, and he had missed the deadline for either paying back the money or answering the complaint. Hightower told Mazza it would not be convenient to see them tomorrow. He said he'd be busy and he would call him back.
Around 6 o'clock, Hightower left home, ran through the open garage door into the house, and saw his family eating dinner. He picked up the checkbook and went back out into the rain. He drove over to Thompson's, and he bought the Devastator crossbow. Hightower also bought 2 sets of bolts, 3 in each set. Hightower carried the weapon outside, and the salesman shoved the crossbow's large box into the back of the station wagon. Yeah, this thing is big, right? It's got like a 3-foot wingspan.
3-foot length. I'm not sure about the wingspan. But yes, he'd had a smaller one, and he decided he needed this bigger one. Now after that, he made 2 stops, picking up a shovel and a pitchfork, and then he drove back home. For him, everything was falling apart. This was a desperate man. Susan was nagging him all the time. The NFA was demanding an audit. His rent was overdue. There were pending lawsuits. And for some reason, what bothered him the most was that Ernie Brendel refused to drop his complaint.
Yeah, but that's all social status that he's worried about.
Well, yeah, that's what's important to him.
Yeah, so he's got to convince Ernie to drop the complaint.
Yeah, which is really not going to happen.
No.
So Hightower had called Ernie to ask him once again not to press the charges, and Ernie had refused. He ran back into the house and straight up the stairs to his room, where he changed into a long-sleeved plaid shirt, jeans, and a heavy coat. On the way out, he told his father-in-law, Clyde, that he would not be home until very late, if at all. Then he walked off into the dark. He walked, finding the bike path and following it to Middle Highway. Hightower was headed toward Ernie Brendel's house to settle things. But first, he had another dirty job to do. He walked behind St. Andrew's School, and guided by the 2 steel posts he had laid down as markers on Tuesday night, he was hidden from view. His shovel and pitchfork were laying where he had left them, and he began to dig. For Chris, the rain was both good and bad news. He was getting drenched, but he couldn't have asked for better conditions to not be seen. He looked at the windows all around the Brendel house, and they were dark. He had the big crossbow at his feet. He removed a short steel pry bar from his coat pocket that had been in his toolbox and felt for the Brendels' back door. He placed the sharp prong of the pry bar beneath the wooden door jamb and gave it a push. So the door sprang inward and was yanked to a stop by a little chain that locked it to the wall. But before he could reach inside, he heard the beeping of an alarm system. So he was startled because he knew that Ernie had terminated the alarm service, deciding it was a waste of money. So Ernie was very frugal, maybe to a fault.
Yes, he was.
Hightower grabbed the crossbow, and then he retreated across the backyard to hide in the trees. Inside the home, Ernie was also surprised at the alarm sounding. He found the noise was coming from the little speaker upstairs, but he had to go all the way down to the main box by the front door to shut it off. He decided that it probably had been set off when the wind blew open the back door. Now, why would you do that? I'm not victim blaming, but I just feel like if my door was open, I'd be a little more concerned than that.
I would too.
So he flipped on the outside light, saw nothing, and turned it off, closed the door, and went back to bed. Meanwhile, hidden in the woods, Hightower was soaked. The first part of his plan had gone well. His secret hole had been dug. But the alarm had thrown off his timing. Now he knew he couldn't get into the house that night. He needed to find a place to rest until the next morning, when he knew that Ernie would be home alone. So Hightower got into the Brendels' garage, and he was familiar with the place. It was where he and Ernie had stored a shipment of wine that they had bought from an out-of-business Boston restaurant. It was musty and cold, but at least it was a dry place to sleep. So with the Devastator crossbow at his side, he dozed off.
The next day was Friday, and Alice missed her bus. Ernie had already taken Emily to school, and he drove her to work before returning home. Hightower heard Ernie's Toyota leave to take Alice, and that wasn't part of the plan. Ernie was supposed to stay home, alone. He wandered through the garage, which was lit by the dim light coming through a row of small square windows across the top of the rolling front door. He picked up the Devastator crossbow, put his foot into the cocking stirrup, and pulled the string back until it locked. He wanted to take a practice shot before Ernie returned. So he loaded an arrow as long as his forearm into the slot and searched for a target. There was a big bag of peat moss against the wall. Hightower took aim, squeezed the trigger. With a hard chunk sound, the arrow flashed from the crossbow, penetrated through the garage wall itself. Hightower was pretty impressed with this, so he loaded another arrow before laying the crossbow aside.
So just that action would tell me that he absolutely was going to kill Ernie.
Yeah.
He wasn't just going to threaten him. So by the time Ernie drove back into the driveway and tapped the garage door opener above his visor, Hightower was hidden back into a far corner. So the rolling wooden door went up, and the Toyota cruised in and stopped. Ernie's first clue that something was going on was when the door started to roll back down behind him, because he had not touched the button. The door clattered slowly toward the floor, cutting visibility inside the garage. So he got out of his car. Then Ernie saw a shadowy figure come around the car, carrying something strange in his hands. Hightower stepped out of the shadows and stopped. He was filthy, but Ernie hardly noticed that because, of course, his eyes were focused on the huge crossbow that Hightower had pointed at him. So Chris Hightower told Ernie that he was ruining him and that he needed to call the NFA and drop the complaint. But Ernie was angry and stubborn, and he said he would not be calling anyone. Ernie kept his hand on the car door, hoping to dive into the car and lock himself inside of it. Ernie was worried not only about his own safety, but about what Hightower might do to Emily and Alice. He decided to get back into the car, and he jerked the door handle. But just then, Hightower squeezed the trigger as Ernie turned, and the arrow hurtled from the crossbow, and its sharp point entered Ernie's left side just above his buttocks. Ernie screamed in agony and fell to his knees. Hightower watched him fall, heard him scream, and reloaded the Devastator. So, pretty brutal.
Well, I guess.
Ernie staggered backward toward the door away from Hightower, who was now struggling to cock the crossbow again. And now he was aiming it at Ernie's head. This time the arrow nicked the edge of Ernie's left ear and burrowed into the lower panel of the garage door. Ernie Brendel knew he was badly wounded, but he refused to surrender. He managed to snap the metal shaft of the arrow in his side, leaving a sharp and ragged edge protruding from his body. Hightower looked up from cocking the crossbow, and he saw Ernie reaching for the car door. So he shoved another arrow into place and moved to the open area of the garage toward Ernie. Hightower brought the crossbow to his cheek, sighted Ernie's chest, and squeezed the trigger. So Ernie was slammed backward by the force of the arrow. It entered his right chest and his lungs. He was spun around by the impact. Blood gushed from the deep chest wound. With his last bit of strength, Ernie opened the passenger door of the Toyota and he scrambled inside, still trying to survive. But Hightower dropped the Devastator and reached into his pocket, now grabbing the claw-tipped pry bar. Hightower overtook Ernie with a bear hug as Ernie tried to struggle away. But Ernie had lost too much blood, and it was spattered around the car. Hightower hit Ernie over the head several times with the crowbar until Ernie stopped moving. But then, standing above Ernie, Hightower put the point of the next arrow just a few inches from Ernie's heart. The force of the penetrating bolt made his whole body jump. Then Hightower staggered away and sat on the concrete floor. But he knew he couldn't rest because he had a lot more to finish in his plan.
Yeah, he's got at least one more.
So that was really overkill. What do you make of that?
Well, he was angry.
Very angry.
Yeah.
This was more about revenge than trying to talk him into anything. It was brutal.
Yes.
And he was already dead or dying before he did the last bolt. Why do that? It's just a scary guy. Very scary guy.
Yes. So a little while later, Hightower arrived back at home, riding Ernie's bike and looking crazed. He parked the bicycle in a thicket and went in through the back way, happy to see the Chevy station wagon was still in the driveway. He planned to clean up, drive the station wagon back, and haul Ernie's body away, either to the grave he had dug or somewhere deep in the New England woods. So Clyde Slicker was home alone, working in his basement workshop. He was shocked by the filthy state of his son-in-law, who muttered something about needing a shower and walked upstairs. So Clyde thought that Chris looked hungry too. So he went to the kitchen, poured a glass of orange juice, and put out a couple of granola bars for him. Clyde was worried that Chris would find that his guns were missing. On the advice of her lawyer, Susan had decided to get rid of some weapons in the house. So a family friend took the guns to the police station for safekeeping. Probably a good idea.
Yes, but then Clyde saw something he'd never seen before, probably never thought he would see. Chris Hightower put his stained and muddy clothes into the washing machine himself. It was the first time he had ever washed his own clothes. Hightower was wearing a white t-shirt, jockey shorts, and dark socks. He ate the food. Clyde told him then that someone from the National Futures Association phoned that morning and wanted him to call them back. So, Chris acknowledged the message and went back upstairs.
Yeah, what's he going to say? I know.
Yeah. So minutes later, Hightower dialed a number in New York, and sounding quite upbeat, he told Timothy Wigand of the NFA that all was well. He said Ernie Brendel had decided to drop the complaint. Mazza and Wigand did not need to come up for an audit after all.
That's not going to work.
Wrong, Wigand told him. They needed that information in writing from Mr. Brendel. Until then, the complaint would remain in force. So, Chris Hightower would have to make another adjustment.
Yeah, but what happened next was totally unexpected. Constable Vincent DeFalco and 3 Barrington policemen were at the door. Clyde opened the door, took the men into the den as Chris came in from the kitchen. But they said nothing about Ernie Brendel at all. Something about a restraining order, court papers, and a judge's decision. That's when Chris realized that he was just getting divorced, not arrested for murder.
What a relief.
What a relief.
So before they escorted him from his home, Chris glared at his father-in-law. Moments before, they'd been washing clothes and fixing his eyeglasses together. So Chris now realized he'd been set up by Clyde Slicker. He handed over his keys to the house and cars before walking out, carrying only a briefcase and a brown paper grocery bag filled with clothes. The police did not know a murderer was walking away from them with a large pistol in his briefcase. But Clyde Slicker had noticed a large cardboard box in the station wagon, so he asked the police to take a look. An empty white cardboard box, partially covered with a dark trash bag, had the word Devastator stamped across the top. Now, meanwhile, Chris Hightower had no money and was suddenly unhoused. He could no longer use his in-laws' station wagon to get rid of Ernie's body. He could not get the bicycle he had stashed in the trees behind the house either, or the police would definitely notice and question that. So Chris suspected that Ernie kept money around his house, money that he desperately needed and planned to find. But now the police had thrown him out of his own home, and he couldn't use the station wagon to transport the body. So he looked at his watch and saw it was almost 1 o'clock, and Emily Brendel became his priority. She would get out of school at 2 p.m., which gave him only an hour to get himself together and pick up the child. She could not be stranded at school because people would wonder about the absence of reliable Ernie. So someone might come and look in the garage and find all the blood.
Yeah, right.
So Chris decided to ask Suzanne Henderson, who had served on church committees with him, to give him a ride. She was about to head out on errands anyway, so she agreed. 5 minutes later, she stopped at the Lutheran church next door to the Brendel home, and Hightower thanked her for the ride. Henderson asked if he was all right, and he said yes. Using Ernie's keys, he let himself into the Brendel house, went to the telephone, and called the Primrose Hill School. When Secretary Gwen Groves answered, Hightower told her that he was Ernie and wanted Emily to walk home from school. But Groves said no dice. She said there's no crossing guard that would be on duty because Emily and her class were on a trip down to Newport and they wouldn't get back until 3 o'clock. So she said she'd leave the message with Principal Elizabeth Durfee.
With the extra time, Hightower rifled Ernie's desk. He didn't find any cash, but he came up with 2 checkbooks. Hightower called the Rhode Island Hospital Trust Bank to determine the account's balance, citing checkbook account numbers for verification. Hightower wrote out 2 checks, one for $2,700 and the other for $1,500. Put them in his wallet after forging the name of Ernest Brendel. So when the school bus pulled into the school parking lot at 2:45 p.m., Principal Durfee took Emily into the office to phone her father. And after getting no answer, Emily got on the YMCA bus as planned to join the after-school program. Moments later, Hightower walked across the same parking lot and introduced himself to one of the teachers who had been on the trip. Now, the teacher's guard immediately went up because the man she did not know was asking about one of her kids. So she directed him to see the principal. Calm and polite, the man said there must be some miscommunication, heading back toward the Brendel home. Now he had to kidnap Emily from the YMCA.
That's so scary. It's horrible. So he cleaned the blood-stained Toyota's windows and sprinkled baking soda on the back seat. He backed the car out of the garage and drove to the Y. Once there, Pam Poirier refused to recognize his authority to take Emily home. So good for her. This meant going back to the house, getting Ernie's wallet from his pants, getting his license, and calling the YMCA to again imitate Ernie giving permission, then return to the Y, and finally at 4 o'clock convince the staff he had the proper credentials to take Emily. And unfortunately, he would get away with that. By the time the Toyota drove away with Emily inside, Chris Hightower was exhausted and irrational, although he'd been irrational. He chatted with Emily, and once at the house, he sent her upstairs to play, telling her that Ernie was at an appointment and that her mother would be home soon. So Emily had no reason to doubt Hightower. Alice was about to get off work in Providence, and Chris would keep Emily quiet and inside the house until Alice showed up. Then there was an unexpected knock at the door. Hightower opened the front door and saw a young muscular man holding a large wrapped item. The guy was there to deliver a box spring, but Chris told him that the person who had ordered it wasn't home, so he told him to come back another day. Alice's bus arrived at the East Bay Medical Center stop just before 6. She was shocked not to find her husband and daughter waiting for her. Other people on the bus also noticed that the smiling child wasn't there to rush up and hug her mother. Alice walked up the street, past the Primrose School, and then 1 block farther to her home. She let herself in the front door and called out to Ernie and Emily, but there was no answer. The car was in the driveway, but no one was home. She took off her shoes and laid her raincoat across the back of a chair in the dining room. But when she turned, Chris Hightower was standing in the doorway. He had a pistol in one hand and Emily in the other. An angry Hightower rushed toward the confused Alice with Emily and went down to the basement. With a thick rope, he tied them to a vertical beam in the middle of the room. The cellar had only one small window high up on one wall. Any screams would not be heard by anyone, but Hightower gagged them anyway. And he was in a hurry now because the banks would be closing soon. He wanted to cash those bad checks.
Gotta get them. So Hightower left. Alice, terrified, but trying to keep Emily calm, heard the phone ring upstairs. The answering machine clicked on. Where was Ernie? She had a fear that he is already dead. Hightower hurried over to the Bank of Barrington, where he cashed the $2,700 check at 6:13 p.m. 11 minutes later, he was at the Citizens Bank, where he deposited $800 to his personal account, bought an $1,800 treasurer's check in the name of Dennis Murphy to cover his back rent, and kept $100 for spending cash. Now, to celebrate the small win, he went to Sears and bought some clothes, using one of Ernie's credit cards. Back at the house, he returned to the basement. He no longer thought of Alice and Emily as anything more than a couple of obstacles.
Did he ever really look at any person as a human being with the same kind of feelings he had? Totally narcissistic and sociopathic.
Yeah, I think that's the way I'd be looking at things.
Yeah. So now Hightower felt like he had plenty of time to think about what to do next. He felt like he was back in control. He had money, he had the rent check. Ernie was dead in the garage, and the woman and the girl were tied up downstairs. At 10 p.m., he lay down on the Brendels' couch and slept. So he was able to sleep. What other sign do you need that he's a psychopath? So Chris was baffled when he went to the computer on Ernie's desk, which had a completely different system. To make the NFA letter seem legitimate, it needed to be written out on Ernie's computer. So he hauled Alice up from the basement and forced her to type while he dictated. Alice needed to cooperate or he would hurt Emily, he threatened. So later, police would discover that there was a clue left by Alice. She had typed the initials CH in the file. So then Hightower made Alice telephone Jim Page in New York, who was expecting to meet with Ernie. Knowing Emily's life was at stake, Alice told Page that Ernie's mother had taken a sudden turn for the worse, and he had left to see her. So now it was Saturday at 7:07 in the morning when they hung up. After that, Hightower had no further use for Emily or Alice Brendel. In the kitchen, he mixed a cocktail of fruit juice laced with 20 crushed sleeping pills that he had bought from a drugstore. Downstairs, holding his pistol to their heads, Hightower forced them to drink it. Within moments, they slouched almost unconscious at his feet, one on each side of the basement pillar, with Alice reaching out to cradle Emily in her arms. So Alice was first. He tied a long white scarf around her neck and pushed hard against the slip knot. She couldn't resist, but she was definitely aware that he was killing her. Alice Brendel died knowing she was leaving Emily at the mercy of this killer. The 8-year-old girl was barely conscious, but she was probably aware too that something was hurting her mother and that her father was not there. So, Hightower had used a crossbow and a steel bar to kill Ernie, and he had slowly strangled Alice with a scarf. For little Emily, he used his bare hands. He wrapped his fingers around her neck and squeezed. Then Hightower pedaled Ernie Brendel's bike down to the Barrington police station. So feeling like he really had accomplished some things, he handed over the $1,800 check to Sergeant Rick McGinnis, saying it was in settlement of a rent dispute. He still needed more money because the amount he had stolen from the Brendels' account would not last him very long. He had $900 in cash. He pedaled over to his office and told the landlord that the police had their check. Then opening his wallet and pulling out a $20 bill, he asked the landlord to leave a new set of keys in the mailbox. Then he rode away on the bike, heading to coach his son's soccer team. So like everything's normal.
Yeah.
So at the soccer field, about 35 parents were milling about. A fellow coach, Bob Pearson, was very surprised to see Chris Hightower. Susan had already phoned Pearson to tell him that Chris would not be at the game because of the divorce action, but Chris calmly explained that he had every legal right to be there because he was a coach. But then Susan drove up. She didn't want to talk to Chris, to see him, or have him anywhere near her children. While she waited in the car, refusing to let the boys get out, her friend called for the police. 10 minutes later, a patrol car showed up, and a Barrington patrolman approached Hightower. By now, everyone in the park, of course, realized something's going on. The officer asked Chris to leave, but he said he had the right to be there because he was a coach. The policeman then warned him that he risked arrest if he stayed there. So he made a brief tour of the clusters of parents. He went around shaking hands and telling them how much he had enjoyed being a coach, but that he probably would not be able to continue.
This guy's something.
Yeah. So looking like a man who had been wronged, he climbed onto the bike and pedaled away. He'd been kicked off the soccer field, but he was still getting away with murder, so he probably felt okay about that. He returned to the Brendel house, and using the Brendels' Toyota, he set out to run errands until it got dark.
Yeah, back at Sears, he used Brendel's credit card to buy 2 red plastic gasoline cans, remembering how helpful his previous arsons had been. Hungry, he went by McDonald's, picked up some food. He then drove to Somerville Lumber in Seekonk, where he bought 4 one-gallon containers of muriatic acid. Susan Hightower had another surprise. As she went to the police station to complain about her husband breaking the restraining order, she saw her husband's landlord. He showed her the $1,800 check and said Chris had paid off the overdue rent. And once it got dark, Hightower got to work in the garage, using the acid and a scrub brush and a scrub broom to clean up blood. Then he drove the Toyota inside and closed the door. He loaded Ernie's stiff body into the trunk and slammed the lid closed. Punched the button and the door opened. Hightower backed out, not using the lights. His left rear fender hit the porch steps, pulled forward, then back up again to park on the grass, with the car's trunk facing the back door. From the basement, he brought up Alice's body and shoved it into the back seat. Then he made the trip again for Emily, dumping her on top of her mother.
Awful. This is a really awful one.
It is.
Yeah. Circling the St. Andrew's School field, he steered down the track until he found the hole he had dug earlier. Picking up his tools, he dug another one 3 feet away at an angle to the first. The new hole had to be deeper, so he went down 3 feet, but it was only 4.5 feet long and 2.5 feet wide. The dead adults would not fit into these short graves, so Hightower bent them at their knees. Then he shoveled dirt onto the bodies until the ground was level. Before leaving, he found 2 short branches and, on the grave containing the bodies of Alice and Emily, arranged them in the form of a cross. But he was far from done. He steered the Toyota off the Connecticut Turnpike at exit 58 and got lost. His destination was the home of Ernie Brendel's sister, Christine, and her husband, Alex. So it was a sad ride down Interstate 95 from Rhode Island in the blood-soaked car where Ernie Brendel had died. But that was okay with Chris, because he counted on the shock of blood to accomplish what he had in mind. So by the time he reached Connecticut, he had figured out how to turn the messy car to his advantage.
Chris's plan depended upon his nerve and wit. He felt confident that he would soon take Ernie's sister for a lot of money. Violence would not be needed this time, just a little extortion. With the cash, he could settle a few scores with people who had wronged him, then disappear. Now, as usual, he overestimated his abilities. He had thought Ernie Brendel was about as stubborn as a person could be, but he had not yet met Ernie's sister, Christine.
Yeah, so Christine and her husband are a couple of smart cookies, and
Yes.
He's not going to be able to fool them one bit. So before leaving Barrington on Sunday afternoon, he'd returned to Somerville Lumber and paid $12 in cash for a 50-pound bag of garden lime, a 50-foot garden hose, and a wire brush. So he used these purchases to scrub down the garage, and afterward he went inside the house. There was a knock at the back door, and 2 little girls wanted to know if Emily could come out and play. That's heartbreaking. Wow. But of course Hightower said, no, Emily's not home. Later he went to the church to use the photocopying machine in his wife's office when he thought everyone was gone. But Associate Pastor Rose Amadeo came in while he was running papers through the machine, chatted briefly with him about the pending divorce, gave him a reassuring hug, and left. Then Chris left a few minutes later.
At 4 o'clock, after making sure everything he needed was in the car, Chris left Rhode Island. Christine had returned from a weekend visit with her ailing 82-year-old mother in New York. 4 guests were coming over to her house for dinner, bringing lobsters, and Christine had to make the salad. When the guests arrived, Christine's husband Alex had not even started to pour the wine, and someone else showed up, and that was Chris Hightower.
Yeah, so the guests went into the kitchen while Christine and Alex met Hightower on the front stoop. He was a balding man in a short-sleeved blue shirt, blue jeans, and large black high-top sneakers. "I'm Christopher Hightower," he said. "I'm a friend of Ernie's, and I have to talk to you." In his hand was a little address card taken from Ernie's Rolodex. Christine explained that dinner guests had just arrived, but that they could give him 10 minutes if it was really important. Hightower said he needed more than 10 minutes and that he would come back later. "It's a very important matter. How long will they be here?" But Christine was already suspicious, and she dodged the question. Alex had never heard of Christopher Hightower, but Christine remembered Ernie mentioning the name a couple of years earlier. Hightower said it wasn't an urgent matter, and he politely retreated from the house, allowing Christine and Alex to have their dinner. But Alex and Christine were worried. Christine phoned Ernie's house, but there was no answer, and she knew it was unusual for no one to be home on a Saturday night. So she really began to feel uneasy about this stranger. But Hightower had some time to waste, so he ate some hot dogs at a diner, drank a soda at McDonald's, put gas in the car, and drove around, and he ended up getting lost again. He finally showed up back at Christine and Alex's house just as the guests were leaving. So Alex asked him to wait in the library. When the front door closed and the 3 of them were alone, Hightower walked from the library back to the hallway, following the couple into the kitchen, and he began to tell them one of the most bizarre crime stories ever. His story had a little bit of everything. organized crime figures, mass kidnapping, ransom demands, armored cars, and long explanations of his own talent in running investments up to huge profits for his clients. So the couple could barely keep track of the story as the time passed, and they tried to put together what this guy at their kitchen table was really saying. Christine, a historical consultant with the Museum of American Political Life at the University of Hartford, and Alex, a physician, had spent their lives dealing with facts. But tonight, the facts were hard to come by. Still, the evidence that Hightower did present was horrifying enough to lend some credence to some parts of his story.
Yeah, he first showed them Ernie's wallet, brother's credit cards and receipts, his driver's license, and Alice's wedding rings. He said that Ernie, Alice, and Emily had been kidnapped by the mafia, along with his own wife and 2 little boys, and that he was acting on instructions given to him over the phone by the kidnappers that afternoon. Hightower had been allowed to speak on the phone with the kids, Alice, and even Ernie, who had trouble talking because he had been badly beaten. Alice said everyone was all right, except that Ernie had a broken jaw from when he resisted the kidnappers.
Yeah, Hightower said the kidnappers told him to come up with a ransom of $300,000. Evidence of their actions could be found in the Brendel garage, and that he should always remember they'd be watching his every move. He went over to the Brendel house, and in the garage he found the blood-spattered Toyota. Ernie told Hightower on the phone, according to Hightower, that he could only raise $50,000 and that Chris should go to the house and find Christine and Alex's address on the Rolodex. Hightower said the kidnappers told him to come up with a ransom of $300,000. Evidence of their actions could be found in the Brendel garage, and that he should always remember they'd be watching his every move. So he went over to the Brendel house, and in the garage, he said, he found the blood-spattered Toyota. He said that Ernie told him on the phone that he could only raise $50,000 and that Chris should go into the house and find Christine and Alex's address on the Rolodex. They'll know what to do, Ernie had told him, and they can get the money.
There was no way for Christine and Alex to come up with such a large amount of money on a weekend. Not to worry, said Hightower, as he revised his figures immediately. He thinks quickly.
Yeah.
I can raise $175,000 by putting up my business as collateral, he said.
Oh, yeah, his business that was in the hole.
But the kidnappers want $75,000 in cash by Tuesday morning. I'm to rent an armored car from the First Federal National Bank in Boston, and when we deliver the first payment, they will release some of the hostages.
So is that something you can do, is rent an armored car?
This is just getting into
wacky.
Twilight Zone stuff.
It really is, and these are smart people, so they're just thinking, what the hell?
Yeah, they must be listening to this and wondering.
So Christine and Alex wanted to call the police, but Hightower said no way. The kidnappers said they would kill everyone if the authorities were notified. He explained the situation, saying that he had invested substantial funds and made big profits for some men with connections to organized crime. So when Ernie had advised him to drop them as clients, they became very angry and kidnapped both families in retribution. You know, it happens all the time.
Yeah.
So Christine asked, organized crime? And he said, yeah. And she said, well, those are the worst kind of people. And she explained that she had a friend who was a criminal lawyer who dealt with such people on a regular basis. So that must have really thrown Hightower off his toes there. She said this guy had contacts, and it was her understanding that the mafia did not kidnap children, and these people had taken 3 kids. So the color kind of drained from Chris Hightower's face. No, he said, the kidnappers were very insistent that we don't call anyone.
Then he had another surprise when Christine excused herself, went upstairs and changed into black jeans and a black sweatshirt. She planned to sneak out of the house, evade the watchers, and reach another home from where she could call the FBI. Now, Hightower quickly talked her out of that, too. Much too dangerous, he said, thinking that this woman was more stubborn than her brother.
Yeah.
Hightower decided the time had come to back up his story with some proof. So he escorted Alex and Christine out to the Toyota in the driveway. It was too dark, so Alex had Hightower drive it into their garage, where he turned on the light, and it was shocking. Hightower pointed out stained sections of the seats where blood had caked, a back seat covered with a white powdery substance that Hightower said was baking soda to cover the smell. Blood on the windows, blood inside the door, blood on the visors and on the seats. He opened the trunk and a foul odor came out. It made Christine turn away from it.
Well, it was probably the smell of decomp. The body had been sitting for a while. So the doctor part of Alex's brain told him, this is all wrong. There was so much blood that the person would have to be dead. So now Christine and Alex are very alarmed. But Chris Hightower said the only injury was Ernie's jaw that had been broken, which didn't make sense. Christine also was fed up with his ramblings. Too many of these things didn't add up. The couple knew that something terrible must have happened, and they feared the worst. And, they wondered, who is this guy and what part did he have in it? So they really just began to take control from him. Christine went upstairs, moistened some cotton swabs, tapped them into the bloodstains, and put the soiled swabs into a plastic kitchen bag. And she wanted more proof. She suggested that Hightower change cars and leave the Toyota with them. He could take her mother's car, which was just sitting in the garage unused for the past 6 weeks. So he did agree reluctantly, but then that car wouldn't start and they called a gas station for help. So this is turning into quite a clusterfuck.
It sure is.
The mechanic wasn't able to get the car started, so while Hightower sat in the living room, Christine went through the doorway and took a photo of him. So she's pretty swift, right? She's on top of things. About 11 p.m., she took him upstairs to her office and turned on the lamp on the captain's table. Christine adjusted the pillow on her chair, sat down at the computer, and told him to start talking. So as he dictated, she typed up everything, all about the kidnappers and the ransom and the mafia. And when her printer produced 2 copies, she put one in an envelope addressed to her husband's office in Branford, Connecticut. And she told Chris Hightower to drop it in the mail. She eventually gave him the words he had been waiting to hear all night. Wanting to get this man out of the house, he was pretty creepy. She told him that they would raise the necessary money as soon as the banks opened on Monday morning, and that they would not contact the police.
So then a little after 1 o'clock on Sunday morning, Hightower got back into the driver's seat of the Toyota and headed back to Barrington. He felt satisfied that Christine and Alex would come up with $75,000 for him.
So he's kind of out of his mind if he thinks that. I don't even understand how he thinks this would work out.
It's such a strange story to begin with.
Right.
Told by someone who you can just sense that he's not someone you'd trust.
Oh, God,
or
no.
believe.
God, no.
And he comes up with this cock and bull story that had to be totally disbelieved by the
But I would be frightened to have this man in my house with a car full of blood. And
yeah.
I mean, I think they're kind of brave, because I probably would have gone out the back door and called the police somewhere. But Hightower thought he had one last job to do. Back at the garage, he reloaded the big bag of lime into the Toyota and drove to the fresh graves. Then he poured the white stuff into the holes. But in his haste, he did forget something. The torn edge of the lime bag was fluttering in one of the holes, and he had covered it up. So that missing corner would later point at him as the man who had purchased the lime. So he was a bit nervous when he finally lay down to sleep on the Brendels sofa. You think he might be. He had the sinking feeling that he could not trust Alex and Christine. Probably true. He was right.
Sure enough.
Yeah, Christine had already contacted the FBI. Her phone call to the FBI at 1:20 a.m. on the morning of Monday, September 23rd, set off a manhunt. Special Agent Ralph DeFonso was out of bed at 2:30 a.m. to make the initial contact. He thought he had heard just about everything in his 22 years working with the FBI, but this story really beat them all. The mafia had snatched 2 respectable families in Rhode Island and wanted a Connecticut relative to pay a $300,000 ransom to be delivered by a rented armored truck in Boston. It was just wacky.
Yeah, well, when you say it that way.
Yeah, then it does sound a little unbelievable. So DeFonso stopped by the Guilford Police Department, and then he went to Christine and Alex's house, where he spent 2 hours. So to his surprise, they gave him not only a very complete story, but also cotton swabs with blood samples, film containing photos of Chris Hightower, a neatly typed copy of a statement that he had allegedly dictated, diagrams of stains and items in the red Toyota, and a couple of phone numbers the suspect had written down. So by the time DeFonso left, he really had a report that was hard to believe, but a lot of information.
Before dawn, the agent returned to New Haven and began making phone calls. In Barrington, Patrolman John Alfred, a clean-shaven young cop, was handling the midnight to 8 shift. A car wreck that sent one person to the hospital had been the only action until 2:45 in the morning. And that was when he got a call from police in Guilford, notifying him of the possible disappearance of a Barrington family. Driving past the house once, he saw nothing unusual. Quietly, he coasted into the long driveway at 3:05 a.m., turned off his lights and motor, and sat for a moment. He stepped onto the driveway. The stairs leading to the porch of the big house seemed askew, as if they'd been hit. He decided not to walk around his property or try doorknobs or shine his flashlight into any windows. If he stumbled around the house, he might disturb evidence, such as a footprint or something like that. So he got back into his cruiser and left.
Well, as the case unfolded, law enforcement officers would be careful to preserve evidence and to conduct detailed interviews with people involved in this crime. In a case that would be constructed on circumstantial evidence, they really had to build a clear case. By early morning, the parking lot of the police headquarters beside the Barrington River filled up as law enforcement came together. The crime was at risk of being overwhelmed by the administrative problem of who was in control. Would it be the FBI, the Rhode Island State Police, or would it be the Barrington Police Department? It really was important that they be able to work together. Phones were constantly ringing. There was an undercurrent of mutual respect, which eventually translated into cooperation. So instead of animosity, there was teamwork. Warrants were being filed and printed, and without a court's permission, everything found in a search could be blocked from coming into evidence in an eventual trial. So that was important.
Well, they are.
They wrote the warrants, a judge signed them, and the search began. The big problem was that nobody yet knew what, if anything, had really happened.
Yeah, because all you got is Hightower with his fantastic story.
Yeah, and the blood.
And the blood. Right.
Yeah. So as the morning wore on, teams of patrolmen, detectives, and FBI agents went out to look around the White Church and Hightower's office, with one team sent to Susan's parents' house at 1 Jones Circle to check on the Hightower family. They quickly learned that there had been no kidnapping involving this family, as Hightower had told Ernie's sister. One of the boys was in school, one was at home sick, being watched by a family friend, and Susan Hightower, his wife, was at work at the White Church. Chris Hightower's family had no idea of the seriousness of this situation. All Susan knew was that police were looking for Chris, and that it had nothing to do with the divorce or the restraining order. But a cluster of police cars showed up at the Brendels' white colonial house at 10:15 a.m. FBI agents and uniformed Barrington officers surrounded the exterior. A patrolman went across the street to the fire station and borrowed some bolt cutters to snap the padlock from the garage door. Now, once they entered the garage, they found a dark Audi sedan parked near the rear wall, and there was a broken window at the left rear of the garage, and between the Audi and the door, they found a large damp area. So they decided to go through the back door of the house. The patrolman gave the wooden door a swift kick just below the knob, and it crashed back against the wall, snapping off the little chain. Then the team went from room to room, careful not to disturb anything more than they, really had to, was necessary. All of the phone cords were disconnected or missing, with some wrapped around the receivers. FBI agents saw all the belongings of a family, but no people were there, nobody in sight. In the cellar, they found a wooden beam in the middle of the room that was dirty and dusty on top, but clean on the bottom half. That's where Alice and Emily had been tied up. Up the narrow staircase to the second floor was the bedroom of a child. Little girls' clothes were scattered about, stuffed animals sat on the bed, and books lay open on the dresser. There were no bodies and no obvious signs of violence, but there really was an eerie feeling in that house.
So the hunt for the Brendel family had begun, and Barrington Detective Sergeant John Lazaro and FBI Special Agent Jack McGraw were confident that sooner or later the Toyota would turn up and Christopher Hightower would be arrested. They just had no idea where he was. At about 1:30 p.m., a patrolman driving near Barrington Plaza passed a red Toyota with plates matching the Brendels' car, and Chris Hightower was behind the wheel. The Bolo warning came out that the Bolo warned that the suspect might have a sawed-off shotgun. So he got on the radio and reported the sighting.
Yeah, Detective Lazaro was nearby, and he drove up beside the Toyota and tapped on his siren. Hightower was feeling pretty good because he just cashed the forged $1,500 check and had cash in his wallet, but then he heard the siren so close that it seemed to be inside his head. So he looked to his left, and the driver pointed and yelled for him to pull over. He steered into a large parking lot, and Lazaro stopped directly behind the Toyota. Then a fleet of other cars flooded into the lot. Lazaro had told Chris Hightower a week earlier that he might be arresting him today. But back then, a bounced check was the question. That was it. Now he's facing the most serious crimes that exist.
Just a bit more. Back in an interrogation room, Hightower stuck with the mafia story. When questioned about the demands made by the kidnappers, Hightower told police they were holding the Brendels and wanted $200,000, which was $100,000 less than he had demanded of Christine and Alex.
Well, he's not greedy. He's willing to negotiate down if he has to.
I'll take some and you'll take some.
Right. He also added that he knew his family was safe, although he had told Christine that his wife and children had been taken hostage as well. So according to Chris Hightower, he had known Ernie Brendel for 3 years, but they were having difficulty because Brendel had suspected discrepancies in a $15,000 financial account that Hightower managed for him. Hightower claimed that he last saw the Brendel family late on Friday when he spent the night on the couch there. The family was still asleep when he left the next morning, he claimed. It was really plain from the grisly discoveries made in the Toyota and from Hightower's kidnapping story that something really awful had happened to the Brendel family. He pretended to be concerned about the family and about their whereabouts, but then he was arrested. He did maintain his innocence, despite his numerous lies that had been found out. So the police had their suspect, but no victims. Until Monday, September 23rd, Barrington wasn't even aware. Then over the weekend, a rumor began that someone had been murdered in Barrington. The truth came out when police sealed off the Brendel home with yellow tape, making it a crime scene. But still, there was no evidence of a violent struggle. The detailed search was just beginning.
Within a few days of the murders, everyone in Barrington knew that the Brendel family was missing. There were rumors, but the only person who knew the truth was Chris Hightower. In the Brendel's car, police found blood, teeth, and the crossbow.
It's not good.
Doesn't sound real good, does it?
No, it doesn't. Then, on November 7th, the bodies of 53-year-old Ernest Brendel, 46-year-old Alice Brendel, and 8-year-old Emily Brendel were found in shallow graves about half a mile from their home. So they'd been missing for 7 weeks by that point. Emily had had her photo taken on her school field trip that Friday, and she was found wearing the same outfit, the same clothing. Autopsies found that Ernie died of arrow wounds to his chest and then trauma to his head. Alice had been strangled. Emily's body showed no signs of trauma, which eliminated anything other than asphyxiation. There was evidence, though, that Emily had been drugged with Benadryl to make her sleepy, and she may have been buried alive. Too drowsy to really fight, but buried alive and died. Really horrific. So once the bodies had been recovered, Chris Hightower would face justice. He was then charged with 3 counts of murder and 1 count of kidnapping, and his trial began on March 18, 1993. The prosecutor had no direct evidence like a confession or a witness, but they did have very strong circumstantial evidence. It was a strong case. Not only did the man who sold Hightower the crossbow testify, but the prosecutor called nearly 100 other witnesses. And this included people who saw him around town, saw him buying the muriatic acid, the delivery man who saw him answer the Brendel's door, and of course Ernie's sister and brother-in-law. So all of these witnesses added up to some definite guilt.
And so Hightower took the stand in his trial and claimed that he was at Ernie's house when the mafia arrived and killed the Brendel family.
Yeah, and this was all his idea because his lawyer said, don't do that.
We got a new story, too.
Yes. Well, the lawyer didn't think it was believable and didn't want him to do it.
He said he saw Emily strangled, and he was threatened. He said a pillowcase was put over his head, and he was forced to dig the Brendels' graves under the threat of his own family being killed. A big part of tearing apart Hightower's story was to show that he was a pathological liar. Now, this included showing proof that he had fabricated his college grades and committed fraud multiple times. The defense called a psychiatrist to the stand to testify that Hightower was delusional, but the court dismissed any insanity claims.
Yeah, I think he was pretty crazy, but I think he knew right from wrong for sure.
As they say, crazy like a fox.
Well, yeah, but kind of stupid too.
Yeah, well, made too many mistakes.
Well, why did he even do it, though? It was pointless.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, the whole thing was just pointless, and 3 people died. So, really tragic, a real tragedy. So, we're going to do a little feedback today. A couple of reminders first. We do have a premium option of TCB, so you can get early, ad-free, and bonus shows. We also send our new members a gift with some swag and a thank you note. We appreciate your support. And if you prefer, you can subscribe at patreon.com/tiegrabber for the same benefits. Other ways that you can support the show are to give us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. Send us an email or a voicemail with your feedback and case suggestions, or just tell your friends to check out the show. If you do have feedback or case suggestions, you can send us an email to truecrimebrewery@tiegrabber.com, or a voicemail can be recorded using the link in our show notes or on our website.
It's time for listener feedback.
So first of all, we have an email from Lisa, and Lisa writes, Dear Dick and Jill, I'm a longtime listener from South Australia, home of bizarre murders. I was wondering if you have seen that Casey Anthony is now on TikTok and setting herself up as an advocate. How can this woman crawl out from under her rock and think that all is forgiven? Being found not guilty in a court of law is not the same as being innocent of a crime. Every time I think she couldn't stoop any lower, she exceeds my expectations. Thanks for shining a light on the victims of these awful crimes.
So we watched some of what Casey Anthony was doing on TikTok, and I got to tell you, she's a whack job.
She is a whack job, and no conscience whatsoever, Lisa, so that will explain how she can crawl out from under her rock. She is talking about being an advocate, and that doesn't even make sense. An advocate for whom? I don't even know what she means, to be honest with you. I listened to it, and I thought it was pretty crazy. Now, a while back, she had a special on Hulu, I think it was. She was really defending herself in that as well, and acting like she was some kind of advocate for justice, which is just ridiculous.
An advocate for justice.
Ah.
Right.
Well, remember there was also a special with her parents a while back where they took lie detector tests and passed them.
Yeah.
And I can see that George and Cindy Anthony do have some issues, but as always, my heart has broken for them. I think that Casey Anthony is just a bad seed, a horrible human. So I really don't think anything will come of that. Let's hope not. She seems to think she'll be famous, and I just don't think anyone can stomach her.
There might be a couple.
Well, a couple, yeah, but...
On one of her little shows, she talked about how if you say she's guilty, she's going to come after you, talking about slander and libel and stuff.
Right, yeah. But all people are doing are stating the facts.
Right.
Right? Craziness.
It is.
She's not very smart either, right? Pretty stupid.
No, just listen to her.
Yeah, not the brightest. I don't know what she does with herself. I know she was living with one of her attorneys way back after her trial. And I always believed there was some kind of sex used for payment of legal services rendered.
Quid pro quo, as we say.
I kind of felt that way, but anyway, just a slime ball. Let's push her back under the rock and never speak of her again.
We'll do that.
Okay, what else have you got?
Well, we were looking for some updates, if there were any, I was just checking on Lucy Letby and Lori Vallow. And there's not that much happening right now. Lucy Letby, the only thing that I hadn't heard about her, or I missed it, was that it started a criminal probe at the hospital. And it was going to focus on decisions made by senior staff, hoping to have results of that by the fall.
Well, we know initially when they did do a review, there were many experts who said no baby was murdered at all. But then there is a podcast through the BBC that talks about it, and they talk about her as if she's guilty, which, makes sense when someone's convicted and in prison. It's fair to talk about them as if they're guilty.
Oh, yeah.
But there's just so much going on that makes people doubt her guilt. It's very interesting. And I would love to find out what they decide on senior staff, which I think they mean charge nurses and physicians.
Oh, yeah.
Because it was primarily a couple of physicians who reported Lucy and believed she was killing babies. But regardless if you think she's innocent or guilty, I really believe that the hospital, the Chester Hospital, they have some real malpractice going on there.
They do.
I know in our series on this, we did a 2-part series, and there were just incredible issues in that NICU.
Quite a bit.
Yeah. So this is going to be ongoing. We don't know if she's going to be allowed to appeal. I'm not sure exactly how criminal justice works in Britain. But from what we've seen, she was turned down to appeal.
Yes, she's been turned down. So from one viewpoint, she's run out of appeals. There's nothing more she can do.
I just can't see that standing, though, because so many people believe that it was a bad conviction.
Well, the Criminal Cases Review Commission is studying the case, and the hope is that they will refer it back to the Court of Appeal, and Lucy can have her or another day in court.
Yeah. Now, one thing I really don't agree with is the thought that having these reviews and going over everything is painful for the families of the babies who died. I have no doubt that it is painful for them, but I don't think that trying to find the truth is a disservice to them. I think they probably would want to know what happened to their children.
Yeah.
And if Lucy didn't do it on purpose, but if it was malpractice by the physicians or because of staffing or because of the facility, that's important to know for future children so that this doesn't happen anymore. I know there have been changes already, but certainly more review is needed.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, so that's a case we'll probably be with for a long time, keeping an eye on.
I'm sure we will.
Yeah.
And then our last little tidbit was Lori Vallow Daybell. She had an interview with Keith Morrison. On
Dateline.
Yeah, no, I got that part. I was trying to remember when it was on. A couple weeks ago.
Yeah, it was 2-3 weeks ago. Maybe not even that long, yeah. How'd you feel about it? Because I had a lot of mixed feelings about it, and you know that Keith's my guy.
Well, I thought it was terrible, and it wasn't even an interview.
Yeah.
And Keith Morrison himself has said it was not a very good interview because she had her own agenda.
Right.
And she wasn't going to answer any questions.
Well, not in a legitimate way, anyway.
Right.
Right. Bothered me that she got attention because you could tell she really revels in attention.
Oh, she loves it.
That's why she's representing herself in Arizona. She was very weird, very inappropriate, almost flirting with him.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think we needed it. Now, when Keith was asked by another reporter why he did it, because he did say that he felt some guilt, maybe a little apprehension about giving her that attention and that time on TV. But that it's something people wanted to know, so he did go along with it.
Yeah, probably reluctantly.
Probably reluctantly, yes. And just don't think that we need to give her any more attention. For me, why are we even doing the Arizona case? I mean, yes, I can see why the family of Charles Vallow deserved to get justice for his murder, because she certainly was behind that. But at the same time, that's just giving her more attention, because then she's in the courtroom and she's representing herself and she's got that hair and that weird face and just can't stand her. Just can't stand her. And I just don't know how the judge can sit there and speak with her like she's a normal human. It's just, these people amaze me that they can stomach people like this, because I can't.
Yeah.
Yeah, so she's going to have her trial on Charles Vallow. There's no doubt in my mind that she'll be found guilty. And then she'll have her trial for the attempted murder of her niece's husband, Brandon. And she'll be found guilty for that. But I mean, what's the point? She's in prison for life. Let's just put her under the rock with Casey Anthony and be done with the both of them. But that said, we probably will have follow-up on it, right? Because if something happens, we're going to tell our listeners.
Of course.
Yeah, okay. Okay, well, everyone, thank you so much for listening. We appreciate you coming to see us at the Quiet End. And we'll see you next time at the Quiet End.
Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.